The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Donald Trump has been taking a lot of credit for the defeat of ISIS. And even though the exact meaning of that defeat is in question, there's no doubt that dating all the way back to the last term of the Obama administration, ISIS, to the extent that they had a caliphate or sort of a physical presence in the Middle East, has been in jeopardy. And as I said during the 2016 election, it's extremely likely that no matter who wins, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, there would be an almost total elimination of ISIS in terms of its formal territory, that the threat will continue to be from the ideology of ISIS, which can infect cells, which can carry out attacks that can be very difficult to stop. And indeed, that's mostly what has happened under Donald Trump. Now, I don't want to get into the sort of politics of how much credit does Trump get? Would it have happened anyway? The plan was really established by Obama. We can have that conversation, but it's not the conversation I want to have with you today. The one I do want to have is that increasingly, even though the sort of political structure of ISIS has been broken down, it was unstable from the beginning, ISIS still has a lot of money. And that is money that in some way is likely to lead to a resurgence of ISIS. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a sort of attempt at Caliphate Part 2. It's possible that that money is going to translate to micro-radicalization and planning more horrible attacks. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but in some way that is money that could be put to use. And that's one area where, and again, we're not being partisan here where we say it, Pat, in the same way that Trump and Hillary would both likely have overseen a decimation of ISIS territory, Trump and Hillary both likely would have not done so well in terms of seizing the financial resources that ISIS has access to. It happens that it took place under Donald Trump, and this is going to be a much more difficult sort of war to fight. It depends much more on financial analysts and tech people in intelligence to fight. It's an uphill battle. And at some point, that money is going to rear its ugly head in one way, shape, or form in support of the ISIS ideology.
Yeah, and of course, it's certainly great that ISIS no longer has territory, but I don't know if the victory laps taken by Trump is going to help that much, especially because it kind of plays into the narrative of ISIS fighters being victims. They kind of lost that narrative once they actually had established a caliphate and had some control over people, because they were able to exert their influence and, of course, tortured people, executed people, did all these horrible acts. Now that they don't have any land anymore, they come across as the oppressed group. And I think that combined with the money that they have, the influence that they still have, could lead to some more terrorist attacks coming from them.
Yeah, and to be clear, they don't seem oppressed to us. I mean, it's an extremist terrorist group. The best they could say is that part of their radicalization is because of some kind of Western hegemony or whatever argument that is commonly made, some fraction of which is probably based in reality. But in practice, what this can mean is that where we have previously only seen one type of radicalization taking place in places like Iraq, Syria, and other parts of the Middle East, where we have seen further sort of isolated cells in parts of Europe, for example, the fear is that the money is going to disproportionately go into funding operations, I guess we would call them, in places like the Philippines, in places like Burkina Faso is another place that is mentioned. So the fight against the radicalization is really the more difficult fight. We knew that all along. And along with that, if you can't execute a financial fight, it's going to be hard to eliminate the possibility of these isolated incidents, which we know even from the get-go, national security experts tell us, are very difficult to predict because of the highly compartmentalized nature. If you take the desire to do harm in those micro circumstances and combine it with significant financial resources, which they still have, it is very difficult to stop those incidents. And therefore, that gets me back to the focus needs to be on dealing with the reasons that people are becoming radicalized to begin with. If you can take away someone's willingness and interest and desire to commit acts of terror, you do way more over the long term to stymie that type of activity than a military can do, than you can do by dropping bombs or using drones or whatever else the case may be. So we'll continue to follow it as we have been following it for many years at this point. The United States Supreme Court is once again going to look at partisan gerrymandering. We recently saw the Supreme Court sort of dodge the question of political redistricting, and there is going to be yet another opportunity because there are two cases before the court starting today. One is from Maryland, where Democrats drew new districts to get rid of one of the two Republican seats in the United States House of Representatives. The other is a case from North Carolina, where which has been in the news significantly over the last couple of years, where Republicans drew maps to strengthen their political power. And this, I mean, I don't want to get my hopes up beyond what is reasonable, but there have been desires for decades at this point for the Supreme Court to really take a more direct stance rather than kind of punting or opting not to even hear cases on political gerrymandering. And the only risk to this is that if and when the Supreme Court does take a position on it, that it's not that useful to Democrats. We know that in general, the sort of population distribution leads to an advantage for Republicans because left-wing voters tend to be more in urban centers and right-wing voters tend to be more in rural areas. You combine that with the sort of coinciding of when the census has been done and when Republicans are in charge, it has led to significant political redistricting, which we call gerrymandering. So the idea is if the Supreme Court makes a decision, it's going to be good for Democrats. If it's a very right-wing Supreme Court, the way it is right now, we shouldn't assume, Pat, that as soon as the Supreme Court decides to do something about gerrymandering, it's going to be good for the left.
Yeah, and of course, Republicans and Democrats can both be perpetrators of gerrymandering, right? But Republicans do have an overwhelming majority of state legislatures across the country. I wouldn't be surprised if in the short term, if right now the Supreme Court says that we're not going to hear these cases, we're not going to look into gerrymandering, and then lo and behold, 10 years from now, when maybe things flip, maybe Democrats are in charge of a majority of state legislatures, all of a sudden it's time for conservative judges to really take a look at gerrymandering and end it altogether. Regardless of the politics, the specific politics of it, though, whether it favors Democrats or Republicans, I just want to see it done away with.
Yeah, I agree. And the unfortunate reality is that as we talked to Bill Oglesby about, who's an expert in gerrymandering probably a year or so ago, even if you do away with political redistricting, because of how left-wing voters are more concentrated in urban areas and right-wing voters are more distributed in rural areas, even without political gerrymandering, the right still has a bit of a systemic advantage. So I don't even have the fantasy, Pat, that fixing this will level the playing field for the left. I just think it'll get us closer to even so that it is less slanted in favor of Republicans by virtue of them living in rural areas.
Yeah, it'll help us out with regards to the House, but the Senate is inherently an undemocratic institution, both undemocratic with a small d and with a capital D, because regardless of population, every state gets 2 senators. So California and Wyoming, drastically different populations, but it's 2 senators for each of those states. That's why we end up with Republican majorities pretty often. And, it's a problem that we really can't fix without a constitutional amendment. Probably not going to happen. This is something we can fix. We can try to end gerrymandering, and I hope it does happen soon.
And once again, this relates to the 2020 census. Donald Trump is already gutting the budget for the 2020 census. It's disgusting. I don't even want to get into it now. We've talked about it before. Extremely depressing. And I do feel that we are more or less impotent on that issue. I don't know what we can do to get the census done in a way that is fair, which will lead to the outcomes in terms of funds distributions and the sort of drawing of how the House of Representatives is, how many seats each state has. All of this stuff relates to the census, and I have no confidence that we are going to get the proper, full, accurate census that we need. partially because it's a strategy for the right not to have one. The right benefits from the census not being done in the right way. We didn't really cover this story specifically. After the horrible New Zealand mass shootings, there was a teenager who ran up to an Australian senator named Fraser Anning and cracked an egg on his head. And the kid's name is Will Connolly. He says he did it in the name of justice after the senator blamed Muslim immigration for those shootings that took place in Christchurch, New Zealand. The teen didn't like that at all. We have now heard for the first time from the teen, and Egg Boy, as he is known by some, is going to be donating the money raised for him to the victims of the New Zealand mass shootings, which seems like the right thing. More than 50 grand has been raised for him. There were actually some sort of split opinions about what this kid did, Pat. There were people who said hitting someone with an egg is an act of physical violence and it's not warranted, while there were others, even on the left, who said that they like it, that in the end, this isn't like shooting someone or punching someone. It's just a raw egg. You just get a little dirty and that's it. And it sort of actually split the left in terms of where is the line on violent protest.
Can I take a position here in the middle? Because on the one hand, you should never put your hands on someone. You should never assault someone. You know, vigilante justice, as I guess this kind of is in a sense, should not be encouraged. But at the same time, when you watch the video and you see this kid just calmly smack an egg on this senator's face, it puts a smile on your face because you know the guy deserved it. So yes, you can never advocate for this sort of thing. It should not be encouraged, but I have to also appreciate it in its own way at the same time.
Well, the other thing that happened is that the senator then, I don't remember if it was an open hand slap or a closed fist punch, punched the kid. And then it immediately opened up discussions about, was the senator overreacting, or he was attacked, and once you throw an egg at someone, you're at risk of maybe getting punched or slapped, and whatever he got, he deserved, even if it was more force than he came in with. What did you think about the reaction from the senator?
I'm watching the GIF or the GIF over and over here, and I don't think that the senator reacted in the right way because he turns and looks at the kid first before smacking him. I could understand if he was just flailing his arms around, not knowing who was attacking him, where the attack was coming from. That I could understand, but it looks as if he's really just trying to get some retribution. And he does smack him twice, too, so I don't think you can excuse the second smack at the very least.
Yeah, maybe if he had turned and seen a guy that looked more like a boxer or MMA fighter than some small teenager, he would have reacted differently, which suggests that there was sort of some calculation behind those two slaps. So in any case, you know, it doesn't seem like the kid needs the 50 grand. It's the right gesture to donate the 50 grand. I'm glad to see it. And maybe we will never hear from either of them ever again, although we'll see. Send me your thoughts about the egg, about the reaction from the senator if you've seen it. And if not, you can very easily find it online. That does it for today's bonus show. New bonus show tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.